Good afternoon, book lovers. It's Robert Boyd coming at you with another book report. Actually, multiple books this time. I decided to read a bunch of the old graphic novels I have on my unread shelves, and my unread shelves are vast, and they cover all types of books. But these I figured, would be pretty relatively quick reads. And I just wanted to clear some space off my shelves. I mean, that's half of what I've been doing these book reports on, are unread books. I mean, obviously they're all unread, but many of them are books that I have like an addiction of getting books, putting them on the shelves, and sometimes I'll read them right away, and sometimes I'll start them right away and put them aside, and then they don't get read for a long time. So I'm making an effort to read all of those. All the ones you see behind me are all read ones. So let's get down to it. So this is going to be multiple books, like I said. We're going to start with Ant Colony by Michael DeForge. Michael DeForge is well, he seems to me to be a young cartoonist, but I think he's not that young anymore. It might just be my age. He's been around now for a while. So this book is it's a pretty funny book and enjoyable for that reason, about semi-anthropomorphized ants and their society that they live in, and it does sort of deal a lot with what we know about ants and insects in general. And some of the guests that appear in it are, the main characters are black ants, and there's some specific characters, I won't get into that, but there's also red ants, who are their enemies, earthworms, spiders, who are everyone's enemies, and bees. And the image I'm showing you here is a battle between black ants and red ants, and I couldn't fit it on my scanner, but it's actually a 2-page spread, and it's kind of an amazing image. Anyway, it's a fun book. I would recommend it, but it's not going to change anyone's life. Next is an unusual book called The Show Must Go On by Roger Langridge, and he is he's an English cartoonist now, but he's from New Zealand. And this was published in 2011. And I met him once, like 30 years ago. So, and he was definitely a young kid then. But since then, he's married and has 2 teenage kids. And he does an almost daily strip, a COVID diary strip, which I'll show you right here, on Twitter. And I'll put a link to it in my post. This book is full of short stories, and it's the drawing. Unlike his daily strip, which is fairly simple, straightforward drawing, the drawing in this book is like so dense, and he likes to crowd the panels with stuff, people, events, etc., and shadow, and he likes ink. So there's several memorable, hilarious stories, like Frankenstein meets Shirley Temple, and it's sort of funny. That made me think, okay, it's like Shirley Temple's a fictional character now. But the one I want to mention first is Dr. Spin. He's kind of a 60s superhero type, and he's fighting people who have screwed up the multiverse in the comics world that he inhabits. And this is a thing in comics that's kind of weirdly common, and it's migrated to the movies even, where basically, in order to make the continuities work, you have to assume that some of the characters are actually living in another parallel universe. But and this really only applies to comic book fans. Continuity is really important to them. It's important that the stuff that's happening in your universe doesn't have logical flaws, even if the very concept of superheroes is inherently illogical. And so in this multiverse, if something gets messed up, it becomes a continuity error. Essentially, superheroes like Dr. Spin are sent to correct it, and that's what the whole story is about. And he corrects it by punching a button, a Deus Ex Machina button. And his power is over probability. So if he can make improbable things happen, then he's exercising his power correctly. And the improbable things would be like, an elephant falling out of the sky onto the bad guy. But finding a Deus Ex Machina button right at the right moment, that's the height of improbability. Most of this is in black and white, but a section of the book is in color, and I just want to show you a color page. This page is from a lengthy story about the devil, who is in this story known as Jack Shit. And you can see in this page he combines black and white and color, and the black and white and color represent two different states for for Jack Shit. Black and white is when he's exiled to Earth, and color is when he's back in hell. Okay. Briefly, a single match by Japanese cartoonist Oji Suzuki, published in 2010. I don't know much about Suzuki, but I know he was a Garo artist, and Garo was, for many years, the leading underground or alternative Japanese comic. It started in the early 60s, and really right about when Garo started, all over the comics creating world in Europe and in the United States, some people just decided, hey, doing commercial comics for editors is a bummer. I would rather do something more expressive, more artistic. And Garo was the first Japanese conception of that idea. In the U.S., it was underground cartoonists, and in France, it was a kind of hippie cartoonists like Moebius and people like that. I like Suzuki's art quite a lot. It's simple, and it serves a purpose pretty well. But the stories are kind of hard to follow. They're dream stories, at least most of them are. Some of them have more realistic settings, and consequently, like dreams, they flip on a dime without really having a lot of sense in the way they change. But this one page I'm showing you is a good example of that, and of the dream story aspect of it. It has a quote in it, and I guess I have to really thank the translator for getting this very poetic quote. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but I assume it's pretty accurate. And the translator's name was Jocelyn Allen. And the quote is, "We met in the dream town. I waited and waited for her in the stream until the end of time." So, occasional poetic lines like that and interesting art, for me, don't totally make up for the fact that the stories are hard to follow, but it might for you. Okay, this one is called Martin Peters, and the artist is Patrick Allaby. He's a Canadian artist, and I think he's from New Brunswick, up in the Maritimes, up in Canada, in the East. And Martin, it's actually a biography of the teenage life and young adulthood of Martin Peters, who was someone he met, I think, at a job that he had. And I want to say this is not that good a story. The story's Martin Peters' life is a little uninteresting, and Allaby, basically because it's true, Allaby's always like questioning whether it's really true, whether he's like getting it right, and Martin Peters, when he saw some of the pages, tried to correct them, and then later Allaby met a girl that Peters had a romance with in high school, and she said a lot of it was wrong because it was from Allaby's point of view. And you know, Allaby had told, Peters had told Allaby the story, and so Allaby interpreted it, and the ex-girlfriend said, "Hey man, this just doesn't ring true." That's like the most interesting aspect of it. So I'm sorry to say I don't recommend that book at all. Okay. Like a Dog by Zach Sally. And Zach Sally is interesting for a variety of reasons. One is that for many years he was the bass player for the alternative rock band Low, and that was the song that you heard opening this book report. I think it's called Monkey. Anyway, this collects a lot of his early work, and he's not like editing out the worst stuff in it. So, and he confesses this in a lengthy afterword. So he basically self-published 2 comics called The Recidivist #1 and #2, and reprints them all. And then there's a bunch of other shorter pieces in the back that were published here and there. And, you know, it's a mixed bag. Some of them are really good, and some of them are not so good. I'm showing you a page from At the Scaffold, which is a story about Dostoevsky being arrested and sent to prison for speaking against the Tsar. And this, everything in it actually happened. And apparently he did a lot of research on this, and read Dostoevsky's letters to his brother that he wrote while he was in prison. And it's good. It's a difficult and moving subject. This next page I'm going to show you is from a strip called Who Killed Wally Wood? Or The Man Who Killed Wally Wood. And Wally Wood was a comic book artist, a really indescribably talented artist. He got to start with EC Comics, doing science fiction comics mostly for them. And then he went and worked for Mad, which was also published by EC at the time, and did some incredible work there. And he continued working through the 60s and stuff, and really he never was as good as he was when he was working for EC and the early Mads, but he was still pretty good. And he designed the costume for Daredevil. He worked briefly for Marvel, and so the red suit with the 2 Ds on it, that's Wally Wood. Anyway, he ended up killing himself after suffering a stroke. So the man who killed Wally Wood is in fact Wally Wood. And the story is about how Zach Sally meets someone who employed Wally Wood towards the end of his life. And the art was really good. I really liked that. Okay. The next book is called Mirror, Mirror. And it's an anthology. And it's edited by Blaise Larmy. And here's a book by Blaise Larmy called Young Lions. And so Mirror, Mirror is published by 2D Cloud. And 2D Cloud is kind of a experimental comics publisher, publishing things that the average person, if they saw them, might say, this isn't comics. I mean, in the sense that there's not really a story, or there's not really what we think of as comics, like a page layout where here's one panel and here's another panel next to it, and you follow along. And Mirror Mirror is like that. Every page is every story in it is experimental and not a traditional comic at all. And it's kind of I think the word I think the subgenre of it is like poem comics. So Larmy was in my opinion, a pretty good artist. He was the creative director for 2D Cloud, but he was fired a few years ago, I think early 2018, for predatory behavior. And I think, I'm assuming it was kind of a Me Too thing, but I've never been able to find what the details were, what his predatory behavior was. So I'm going to show you a page by Catherine Poe. She's one of the contributors. I don't really have that much to say about this. And here's a page by Connor Williamson, who's one of the contributors. And it appears that he's got a poem typed on vellum. I might be wrong. He might have done this all electronically. But it appears that the vellum's overlaid on top of some drawings relating to the poem. And it goes on for many pages with a poem on each page. And that was kind of a tough read. The poems weren't that great, but it was interesting. It was an interesting idea. And what's especially interesting, and unlike poetry, is that each page absolutely required it be reproduced as an image, because unlike a poem, which can just be typeset pretty much any way, as long as the line breaks are correct. And that's the difference between comics and prose in general. But anyway, that's Mirror Mirror. The last graphic novel I'm going to show you is also by Connor Williamson. It's called Antigone, and it's published by Koyama Press. And I did a post about Koyama Press a few weeks ago because they recently just closed up shop. Annie Koyama, the owner, decided to stop publishing comics. So she didn't go out of business, which is the usual reason why a publisher closes up shop, for financial reasons. She just had done what she wanted to do and wanted to move on. And this was actually, when it came out, it was a really well-regarded Koyama Press book, but I hadn't read it, and I'm not sure why. But it's much less experimental than the piece in Mirror Mirror. And unlike Mirror Mirror, which where the art was kind of secondary, here the art is really good, in my opinion. It's spare in a way. I mean, it doesn't it's just line work with some shading, but it's also it's detailed and I don't know. I think it's good. The story is two vacationers, Spida and Linxa, and they don't seem to be quite human. Like maybe this is in a future where people have animal identities. They're on vacation in like some tropical place, and then they go to town, and they want to see a movie at the Galleria, the local mall. Does every city have a Galleria? I don't know. I know Los Angeles and Houston do. And before they get to the movie, they want to buy some drugs because they want to be high when they're watching the movie. And that is a hilarious scene because the drugs are things that don't exist in our modern day drug culture. They have very specific effects, like they'll make you feel near death, but then you'll get better. Or they'll make you not remember having seen something before, which is good if you want to see a movie that you like, but you want to have the experience be as if you're seeing it for the first time. Anyway, it's got an ambiguous ending, which I'm not surprised by, given what we saw in Mirror Mirror. but the art's good and the story is compelling. Okay, so those are all the old books that I just had been sitting on my shelf unread. Now we're going to go to some newer books that I also were unread, but they were more recently acquired. And these are, first we're going to start off with The Wait by Melissa Mendez. And as you can see, it's not a book yet. It's a mini comic. And I have, several issues of The Wait. It's been published by, self-published, I think, by Mendez. But she, if you go to her website, all the issues that have been published to date are up on the website, and you can read them for free. And I recommend it. I mean, I didn't have issue 1, for example, and I was able to catch up there. And the last issue I had, the physical copy of, issue 6, it keeps on going from issue 6 to up to issue 10. And the art is simple and really charming. I'm going to show you an example of a page that, as soon as I read it, I knew I loved the story. And the funny thing is, let me briefly tell you the outline of the story. She describes it as a family saga set in rural New York State. And its main character is a girl named Edie, and she is based on Mendez's grandfather, Jack, who was born in 1936. So it's set in the past. It has this, cartoony, not quite realistic style, and here's a weird confession to make. When I was like in junior high and I was reading comics, we had in our minds we had a strict delineation between cartoony and realistic. A realistic meant naturalistic. Like superhero comics were realistic, even though of course they're totally unrealistic. But like Mad or newspaper comics like BC or something were cartoony. Well, what us comic fans have discovered over the past, let's say 30 years, maybe even longer, but for me 30 years, is that there's literally no reason why cartoony comics can't be serious. And this is a perfect example of that. And the story is really, really dark in some places. And I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to spoil it, but I will leave a link to her site and highly recommend that you check out what's online. And it's a work in progress, so eventually it'll be a graphic novel, I'm sure. But before that happens, you can subscribe to it on Patreon, which I have for like $1 a month, which is a bargain in my opinion. And next, I'm going to talk about a bunch of mini comics I got from Koosh. Koosh is spelled K-U-S, and the S has a little diacritical mark that looks like a little U on top of it, and it's Latvian. The comics are from a small publisher in Latvia, in Riga, and they publish in English. I guess, thinking, right, my thinking is that if they only published in Latvian, they would limit their audience to, I don't know how many people live in Latvia, but let's say 1 million people. But in English, they can reach a lot of people, including me. And their mini comic format is really handsome, I think. It's very small. It's published in color. That's not a good example. And they're about 20-something pages. So each artist does one has to do a concise short story, and they don't just do Latvian cartoonists, which is good because there probably aren't that many Latvian cartoonists. Their comics come from all over the world, and this one, Finnegan's Wake, by Nicholas Mahler / James Joyce is like a microscopic version of Finnegan's Wake, using Joyce's language, and that's what's appealing about it is that you see how the language works, how it works with some images, and it doesn't try to be realistic, as you can see. In fact, it's just figures on a kind of empty blank background, and it's funny. I liked it. And here's something interesting about Mahler. He is from Vienna, so that certainly makes me wonder if he's related to the great composer Gustav Mahler. I have no idea, but anyway, here's one by an artist named Tommy Parrish. I say Tommy, maybe it's pronounced Tommy, but she's from Australia, and I think she now lives in Montreal. And she grew up in Melbourne, which has a kind of, or had at least, a kind of active comic scene. But she wanted to get away from her family, and so moved to Canada. And I read an interview with her where she was like complaining about how brutal the winters are in Montreal. After growing up in Melbourne, I'm sure they seem that way. Anyway, the story called Sufficient Lucidity is about Andy and Emma. Andy was in a relationship with Emma. They had a bad breakup, and the story opens with a fight where Andy comes back to the group house where Emma lived and where he lived to retrieve his cat. But they're trying to block him from being in the house because, apparently he ended on like really bad terms with everyone who lived in that house. And then it just suddenly switches to a time that I assume is somewhat in the future from that incident, let's say a year or so. And Andy seems to have mellowed out and is living out in the country now. And Emma visits him, and he's trying to tell her, I've changed, and sort of feeling out whether she'd be interested in restarting the relationship. But Emma doesn't really want him back in her life. And this is all in, like I said, 24 pages or so. But the art, I think, is fantastic, and I think Tommy Parrish is a really good cartoonist. This one, Man-Made Lake, is by Aidan Koch, or Koch. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Koch. And I actually know her work. I mean, here's a book of hers that whoops, sorry about that. Here's a book of hers that I have called After Nothing Comes, and there's an implied ellipsis after that. So her work tends to be a little bit on the abstract side, a little bit poetic, and this short comic is about someone who's in a therapist's office talking to a therapist who believes she used to be a fish. And the question is, as you're reading it, did she used to be a fish, or is she mental or what? But really, that might cross your mind, but that's not really what the story's about. The story's about this beautiful art and this sort of mood. And part of the art is this. Here, I'm showing you a page that seems incredibly Matisse-like. I don't know if she was specifically influenced by Matisse on this one, but if she was, I wouldn't be surprised. And finally, last comic of the day, by Lucas, as far as I know, Aidan Koch is an American. This comic is by Lucas Weidinger, and he is and it's called Pirate and Parrot. And the story is kind of a trivial sort of, it's one where the short length is just long enough to tell a story that doesn't really add up to much. But so I'm showing you the cover, and it's kind of this thick painted cover. And now I'm going to show you some inside art, and I just thought the inside art looked really great. It was all line work, and with colored, and the coloring is just intense, brightly colored colors, and it is pleasing to look at. So anyway, that's my big comics book report for the day, or until the next time. And some of these books I recommend, some I suggest you pass on, and have a good day.